Welcome to the Momentum Ministry Partners podcast. This podcast is designed to provide momentum in our God-given roles of leadership as we partner together to equip today's Christian leaders for tomorrow's opportunities. Whether you're a pastor, youth leader, ministry volunteer, parent, or student, we want to be your go-to and most trusted resource for equipping and encouragement when it comes to your ministry and leadership influence. Thanks for tuning in, and we hope you enjoy this episode.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Momentum Ministry Partners podcast. Today we're going to be talking Momentum Marketplace, and in just a moment we want to cut to a clip of an interview with one of our youth conference speakers, Jordan Raynor. But right now I have with us our Executive Director of Leadership Development, Katie Cole. Katie, you oversee Momentum Marketplace. This is kind of your baby. Why don't you kind of give us an intro into what we're doing with Momentum and why Jordan is a part of this conversation?
Sure. So one of the things that we've learned is we are in the middle of a church leadership crisis. And that's really what we're focused on here at Momentum Ministry Partners, is equipping churches to raise up more leaders for the church of today and the church of tomorrow. And we know that that involves a real pastoral crisis. We have a lot of pastors leaving ministry. We have a lot of pastors retiring. We don't have as many coming in to take their spots. We know a lot of churches who are without a pastor. And so we have a lot of programs dedicated towards that. However, a healthy church has not only trained, qualified, professional ministers, we also need a lot of strong marketplace leaders who come alongside and serve as elders and deacons and small group leaders and youth leaders. And those together really form the backbone of a church. And in church planting or campusing or just church revitalization, you really need both. And it's about a 10-to-1 ratio. For every pastor, you need about 10 qualified leaders to really make a healthy, strong church. And so I'm working on the marketplace leader side, and we have a lot of things we're doing for that. But at Youth Conference, we brought in speakers like Jordan Raynor to help cast a vision for students about what their life could look like if God is calling them into a marketplace career, what it means to be salt and light in the world, but also what it means to be an adult Christian and be connected into a church community and using your gifts in ministry. We know from the priesthood of believers, every member of a church is a minister, and we have a responsibility as Jesus followers to pursue Jesus and pursue that role in the kingdom, as well as pursue success in our career as salt and light in a dark world.
Yeah, which Jordan goes into that exact concept in this episode. And Katie, what I'd love for you to do is share with our listeners just where can they find the resources, explain even that partnership of how Jordan created some of this content in connection with us, and where can they find that?
So Jordan is a leading voice on this topic. It's also called sort of the faith and works movement, and he's a marketplace leader. He's had very successful companies, and he's got a passion for helping Christians understand their role in the kingdom through their career and through their calling. And so we have partnered with him actually to create a 4-week teaching series that pastors can use to introduce these concepts to their church. If it's something you're not familiar with, it's certainly not a concept that a lot of pastors have been trained in before. So we partnered with Jordan to develop that. You can find that resource for free on the Momentum Ministry Partners website under the Pro portal, or at our momentummarketplace.org website. And Momentum Marketplace is actually a new program that we are piloting right now for churches to connect students, high schoolers and young adults, with marketplace leaders in your church. It's a curriculum that we've developed. We're piloting it right now with churches. It's going incredibly well. It's actually having a bigger response, Eric, than I was hoping for.
Which is good.
Students are having their minds really opened up to the kind of calling God has on their life. And then our marketplace leaders are really finding a place in their own local church to use the experience and the talent and the education that they have invested in, and being able to pour into the next generation, not only in creating a space where our local churches become a place where kids want to learn about their calling and their career calling, but also in a way that they get to disciple the next generation of faith leaders. So we're really excited about it. We got a big grant. We have a lot of volunteers who have gone into it. We spent a lot of time researching the curriculum. And the cool part for us is there really is is no other program out there like this. I looked for it. I tried to partner with other people on youth programs, and really this is a one-of-a-kind, new, innovative initiative that we're piloting. We're really excited. If you are interested in bringing Marketplace to your church, go to that website, momentummarketplace.org. Fill out the email form. You and I will get on a Zoom call. We can talk through how that might work in your local context. We've actually built it to be able to be used in small church environments, in small group environments, in big church and student ministries, and adult small groups. Campus pastors are using it. So we have a lot of different ways you can apply it and work it for your local context. I know it'll be something that's going to be a real game changer for the next generation and even the marketplace leaders in churches.
I agree, and I want to highlight, underline, emphasize, ask all the things, because as a former youth pastor, that 4-week series and curriculum, I got to be a part of like the editing and review and the final end. It is fantastic. I wish I had this 20 years ago when I was first starting in youth ministry to help explain and understand. As a youth pastor, when a student comes to me and says, I want to be a pastor, I know the pathway. I know the ministry resources that are available for them. But when a student comes to me and says, and Jordan and I talked about this a little bit, we want to have an engineering major, but we love Jesus and want to serve in the local church, I don't know what to tell them. So we finally have a resource that is designed for them, for the pastors, the leadership, for you to be able to use and implement this.
And it's totally free. It's totally free.
Phenomenal
Download
resource.
it. We give you the sermon outline. We give you discussion questions. We've created a branding package. There's social media posts that you can do. There's a PowerPoint.
Additional
that you can use.
resources.
Yes, books, podcasts, all sorts of things that can help really bring this topic and this content to life in your youth group or even in your church.
Yep. 10 out of 10, highly recommend. Thank you, Katie. We hope that you enjoyed this episode and the conversation with Jordan Raynor. If you're interested in seeing the conversation that he did at Momentum Youth Conference on the main stage, we'll be sure to link to that in the show notes as well. Well, welcome back to another Momentum Ministry Partners podcast. So glad to have you with us here today. My name's Eric Miller. I'll be your host for today's conversation. We have with us Jordan Raynor. Jordan, welcome.
Eric, it's a joy to be with you, man. Thanks for having me.
We're at Youth Conference right now. We're at Momentum Youth Conference in Marion, Indiana.
Feeling very old.
Feeling very old, feeling very tired. It's like, what, day 4? You've only been here for like, what,
2
a
days.
day?
So I'm not even tired. Yeah. Let's go.
I feel like it's been like 3 weeks and 2 days, but it's good. It's good. It's awesome. We've got students kind of milling around in the background. So if you hear the background noise while you're listening, your AirPods are in, you're like, what is that noise? It's not the best studio, but it's fun. We're like kind of at the zoo. We get
it's
to
like
look
the
at
Today Show. There's a reason why they do this by a window. You know what I mean?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Only the signs outside are not for us. They're for like getting in the right lunch line. So it's fun. It's fun. Well, Jordan, thank you. You just got done doing a session.
Yeah.
We've kind of kept you busy, man. You did a youth worker lab. You kind of popped in there. Just the whole goal of your organization, how would you sum that up in a sentence or two?
I exist to help Christians connect the gospel to the work they do outside the four walls of the church.
Man, that's amazing. And so this morning, you just got done talking to the students in the main session about this idea of who are you meant to be, God's calling on your life, the gifts, the abilities that he's given to each of us. And there's this stigma that we're going to kind of dive into in the church and in our culture today that we want to help students kind of break. So tell us a little bit about yourself first and foremost.
Yeah.
How did you kind of get into this?
Yeah.
Where did this come from? Because I know you started like a tech company. You've had businesses. You've kind of sold them. You've done all those things. And now you're authoring, you're podcasting. You're kind of trying to carry this message out.
Yeah. So the story is really rooted in my experience as a tech entrepreneur. I spent 10 years as a tech entrepreneur. I was in the process of selling my second venture. And I was trying to figure out what the heck I was going to do next. You know, on the one hand, I thought, you sell two companies, it's kind of inevitable that you start a third, right? So that was one option.
Yeah, let's keep this going.
Yeah, but I felt a lot of guilt that I know the kids here are very familiar with. I remember going to church one Sunday and hearing a message that made me feel guilty. How dare I want to go start another business when there's a need for people to go serve as church planters or quote unquote full-time missionaries. And so my wife and I started really seriously praying about planting a church. So that was the two paths, plant a church or start another business. And one Sunday after church, I had a mentor of mine who is a really talented entrepreneur, very serious follower of Jesus. he pulled me aside and he's like, hey, I heard you're thinking about planting a church. I'm like, yeah, and I'm excited. I think this guy's going to write me my first check maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
And he just looked me like dead in the eyes. He's like, yeah, I got to be honest. That sounds really dumb for you. I was like, what are you talking about, Rick? Like, I'm doing the work of the Lord. Like, come on. And he's like, no, listen, Jordan, like, you're a talented entrepreneur. You've served your customers and your investors and your team with excellence. Like, you've made disciples in the workplace. Why do you think you have to go plant a church to do ministry? Don't you get that your work is ministry?
Wow.
And I didn't at the time. And so, he encouraged me. He's like, all right, listen, you've read Genesis 1 a million times. But with this conversation in the background, I want you to go back and read Genesis 1 and tell me what you find. Yeah. And what I found changed my life forever. I saw that before God tells us that he is holy or loving or omnipotent, he tells us that he's a God who creates, a God who works. Wow. And then long before the Great Commission is handed to us by the Creator God, he gives us the first commission to fill the earth, to subdue it, simply to make the world more useful for other human beings' benefit and enjoyment. And once I saw that that's what we were created to do in the beginning, it's God never once retracts that commission, that changed everything. So I didn't go plant a church.
Wow.
I went and ran another business for a few years, and then eventually, ironically, decided that I'm going to give my life full time to this work of championing this message.
That's fantastic. It's like one of those things, like once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Yeah.
And then you see it everywhere.
Yes.
And you're like, oh my goodness, this is like exactly God's design. And so I think it's fascinating. Like we're seeing that momentum. We asked you to come here because for some of our team, we're like, this is so important. And what we're seeing in the church, in student ministries, like, I was a youth pastor for 17 years. I knew how to walk a student through becoming a youth pastor.
Yes.
I could help disciple them. I could give them resources. I could point them in a direction. I could have them intern with me. And then the students that are like, hey, I want to be an engineer. I was like, cool. I'll pray for you.
Pray for you.
I don't know what to tell them.
So, and here's the thing, right? Like, people can be too hard on pastors and youth pastors. Mm-hmm. It's because you just didn't have the tools at your disposal.
Correct.
You didn't have the language to encourage that kid to be an engineer.
Yes.
You didn't have a playbook to follow to disciple them. And what does it look like to be an engineer, not for your glory, but for God's? Correct. What does it look like to think about engineering in a redemptive way? What does it look like to make disciples in the workplace that's increasingly hostile to Christians? And so, can we talk about Marketplace?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, this is what got me so pumped. I'm just
I
going to
love
sell it for you.
I love it.
I'm selling your stuff for you.
You're hitting my questions
I know.
already. It's like you're looking at my notes.
I'm not. Hey, we didn't prep this. No, listen, when you guys came to me and were like, hey, we want to partner together in this Momentum Marketplace.
Yes.
I got super jazzed about it because essentially what Marketplace is this program to come alongside pastors, senior pastors, youth pastors, whoever, to engage the marketplace leaders that are already in your church and match them with students who feel called to those things.
It's literally us creating those resources for the church.
That you needed.
For pastors.
When you were a youth pastor.
That I wish I had 10 years ago.
Yes.
So I had a student actually who had all the leadership abilities in the world.
Yeah.
And I'm looking, he was on my student leadership team. I'm like, buddy, you have more leadership potential in your little finger than I'll ever have. and I would tell him that. I'm like, you should be a youth pastor.
Yeah.
So I fell into this trap where I thought and Jordan, in essence, what I didn't realize I was communicating with this student and with others is that if you don't go into full-time vocational ministry, it's almost as if you're not a real Christian.
You're a second-class Christian.
Now, I wasn't saying that.
Correct.
But that was what that was the pressure that they were feeling. That was the context or culture I was enabling. And I look back on that, and my heart is burdened by that. And as I'm talking with youth pastors, they're like, oh, my goodness, we're doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And so once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Yeah.
And so now from that heartbeat, from that place, we're saying, how do we help speak into this? So Katie Cole, who's our executive director of leadership development on our Momentum staff and on our team, she looked into it. She was like, well, then there's got to be resources out there, right? And we found some of your resources and a lot of what you're writing amazing books, Called to Create, Master of One. If you don't have them on Amazon, go get them. See, I'll sell your stuff too, but go get that. But I'm like, these are almost though written with adult
Yeah.
perspective or for the adult audience.
Yeah.
And so we're like, well, what's for the students? What's for the middle school and high school students who are wrestling with this? They're having to choose a career path in middle school or high school. How do they figure that out? And so we're like, we can't find it. Well, let's
make it.
So I love it. We did it together. Tell us about that
Yeah.
process. What did you and Katie work on? What is that? Where can people find that?
So I was pumped about this because this is one of the top questions I get.
Yep.
Jordan, when are you going to write a book for high school students and college students? And praise God, a lot of college students do read, especially Called to Create and Master of One. But I was excited. We teamed up and put together a 4-week-long teaching series. I personally, not somebody on my team, I took all of my content and structured it in a very simple outline that walks through over 4 weeks. Number one, the fact that God himself is a working God. That's the first thing he tells us about himself, that Jesus spent 80% of his adult life working a regular job, right? So that's session one, right? Because we're made in God's image, so we need to start there, right?
Yeah.
Second, we dig into the first commission of Genesis 1 to fill the earth and subdue it. The third week, we talk about the Great Commission and how kids outside the four walls of the church working in the marketplace are the best equipped to make disciples in our post-Christian context. And then week 4 is all about helping them discern the specific calling that God has placed on their life. So I think you can download, I know you can get it for free.
Yep.
I think it's at momentummarketplace.org. Is that it?
Yeah, you can find it on the buildmomentum.org website.
Okay.
It's under our marketplace. It's actually under our Pro Plus resources. So because this is designed for youth pastors and churches, pastors to be able to like download so they can get it in a number of places. Yeah. So we'll link to it in the show notes of this and make sure that everybody can find that.
Hey, can I say this?
Yeah.
Sorry. Because I think this is why pastors are asking this question. Pastors are smart. You recognize, I call it the license to license gap. Pastors know that on average, you're going to lose kids from the time they're 18 until the time they get married, between their driver's license roughly and the time they get their marriage license.
Yeah.
What are kids thinking about in these 10 years? They think about two things, dating and work, right?
Yeah.
But because the church historically hasn't talked about work, our kids are leaving to go find wisdom for their careers outside of the church. But God is the author of work. He created work, right?
Yeah.
We have the market cornered on truth about work.
Good.
So we are best equipped to teach our kids about God's design for work, right? And so that's why I got so excited about this, because this is a first step in that direction of being able to encourage kids in the callings that the world is already encouraging them with.
You're excited? I couldn't tell.
Yeah, I know. I got one speed.
Dude, I love it. I love it because the reality is like the church has done a really good job of hiring ministry professionals to do the work of the ministry. And when you look at the whole of Scripture, we're called to equip the saints to do the work of the ministry. And so and I know you know all these statistics, but like at the fastest like leaving demographic in the church is these highly gifted young professionals.
Yes.
And they want to serve. They're like, we have these gifts, we have these skill sets, we have these passions, and there's nowhere for us to serve in the church because they're like, well, we have a children's director, we have a worship leader, and they're like, yeah, but I have something to offer too.
Yes.
Is there a place for me? So talk about that mindset. How do we change and shift perspective there?
Yeah.
Both as the church and as a marketplace leader.
Yeah.
Like, how do you engage with your church?
Yeah, I think service is one level of it, right? They don't see clear opportunities to serve. You're like, why am I serving in the nursery? I'm a CFO of a Fortune 500 company, right? Like, sure, I'm happy to do it, but like, this is not the highest leverage use of my God-given gifts, right? But secondly, they just feel guilty. My whole audience, my whole tribe are mere Christians. They're not religious professionals. I talk to them every single day. They are sitting in your pews feeling guilty about the work that God has called them to do because you never talk about it. And listen, like, in some ways I don't blame you because you haven't been given the language to do it, which is why we're doing this with Momentum Marketplace. But it's opportunities to serve and use their gifts, but it's also just hearing about it from the pulpit. Right? The best thing you can do as a pastor to alleviate that guilt is, number one, use workplace analogies in every single sermon, especially when you get to the application section.
Beautiful.
And number two, don't just commission missionaries. Don't just commission. But we're about to go back to school, right?
Dude, so good.
What if every pastor said, hey, I want everybody who works in the school system to stand up right now, and we commission you. That is your mission field. That's where God has called you. Go and do it with excellence and love and in accordance with God's commands. These are the types of things that send a signal to our church that we agree that God has called you to this thing, and we want to support you any way we can in it.
Wow. I love that, because I think the other side, there's stereotypes. Some are true and some are stereotypes for a reason. Yeah. But there are stereotypes within the church that pastors want to talk about giving.
Yes.
For the sake of having and it creates, again, this false context that all the pastors care about is the tithes and offerings that come in so that they can fund the building, keep the lights on, and build a new parking lot and all the things. And what it does is it communicates to the business leaders, to the marketplace leaders, the missional marketplace leaders even, where they're like, all you value is my pocketbook. Correct. And what I'm going to give you. And so what if as pastors and ministry leaders and church leaders, we started trying to, and I know this is what you're super passionate about, change the language to say, I actually value your mind, your heart, your passions, your abilities, your God-given giftedness, and we're going to work together to figure out how do we do this. And that is what Momentum Ministry Partners and our partnership with you, we want to see happen, where like, I'm doing this with my hands if you're watching the video, like the two sides come together and we develop the healthy leadership of a church with those leaders. I know you're super passionate about it. Yeah. Talk about your role within your church and how you're doing that, because I know that's a big part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do serve as an elder in our church. I've never been a pastor, but have stepped into that elder role. And we're thinking a lot about this. And we do talk a lot about language.
Yep.
Right? I think a lot of pastors are just struggling for the right words. Everyone's afraid of saying the wrong thing. Here's some language that we found really helpful. Intrinsic and instrumental value of the work. So your business leaders, your marketplace leaders, your doctors, whoever in your congregation, they already understand that their work has instrumental value in that they're going to write big checks to fund the work of the local church. What you need to be telling them is, hey, yes, we want your tithes and offerings. Your work has instrumental value. And it has intrinsic value outside of the four walls of this church. Because we believe that as you are going about your work outside the church, that's where disciples are being made, and that's where we're scratching off glimpses of the kingdom, glimpses of beauty and justice and love, and making people long to meet our King.
Yes, yeah. So in your conversation that we just had with the students in the session, you referenced something that I almost was like wanted to stand up and like keep going on this. Like, so I wanted to come back to this because what you just said touches on it. Like, the fastest growing religion in our world today is the nuns, right? The people who have no religious background whatsoever. They believe in nothing, right? So why does that matter for this generation? You touched on it briefly, but expound on it.
Let's go. Let's go.
Yeah.
So let me back up. Yeah. I'll come back to present day in a second.
Perfect.
There's a great, very dense book called Evangelism in the Early Church by Dr. Michael Green. He was like the expert on how Christianity exploded in the first 3 centuries. And what he found was that 80% of conversions in the early church did not come about through pastors, did not come about through donor-supported missionaries. They came about through mere Christians working as tent makers, working as shepherds, or working in wine shops and around market stalls, right? Now let's look at our current context, right? We're back in this world where, at least in the West is increasingly hostile to Christianity. The non-believers I know, my neighbors, are not walking through the front door of a church to learn about Jesus for the first time. So we have to bring the church to them. Yes. That's the only solution, right? Yes. And so I think as we're thinking about this strategically, and what does the Great Commission look like? How can we be most effective at making disciples at this post-Christian cultural moment? It's equipping our young people and telling them to scatter. Don't just gather in the local church. Don't just bring all your friends. I mean, invite them, but they're likely not going to come anymore. Go out in the world, into your schools, into the workplace, wherever you are, and make disciples there. This is Ephesians. Yes. We're equipping the saints to do the work of ministry outside the four walls of the church.
Yes.
It's almost like this was God's plan. I
Right?
don't know. Crazy
well,
thought.
it's Matthew 5.
Yes.
It's the like salt and light.
Yes.
You have to be light, but the concept, it's implied.
Yes.
It's the you're going to the dark places
Yes.
to bring the light. You're going to the place where there's salt that's needed to add flavor.
Yes.
So Jordan, expand on that. Like how are you helping change our thinking here in the context of like when you work, how do you do that in such a way so as you point, because I don't think you're saying like you should like not get your work done and just stand around and evangelize and like do Romans Road, right?
Not at all.
Talk into that mindset.
Listen, oh man, we could go all day on this. The most effective people I've met at making disciples at this post-Christian cultural moment, first and foremost, are so good at their jobs that nobody can ignore them. They're excellent. They work with excellence because guess what? Excellence attracts the lost. Your coworkers will listen to anything you have to say if you're making them money. I promise. Yeah. Right? But that's where we got to start. It's love your neighbor as yourself first, right? And then win opportunities to share the gospel with the lost. Secondly, I don't think we can just be technically excellent. I think we have to be excellent people in the model of Jesus. We have to be excellent in a loving way and be the people in our offices that care about other people beyond what they could do for us, right? And then third, I think we got to look proactively for opportunities to move from the surface to the serious to the spiritual in conversations with those that we work with, right? A lot of us go to work, we just talk about sports, we talk about the game, we talk about whatever. Man, we got to be proactive about moving those conversations somewhere, right? William Wilberforce, who was a disciple-making machine in Parliament in the late 1700s, he kept this little journal. He called it his list of launchers. It was brilliant. He would just write somebody's name down and right next to their name, conversation starters based on his last conversation that would launch that conversation from the surface to the serious to the spiritual. So I do the same thing. When I go, before I get my haircut, right, every 3 weeks, I look at my list of launchers. I say, okay, what am I going to do? Where can I take the conversation with Jessica to move this to something a little more serious and a little bit more spiritual? And you'd be shocked what that 30 seconds worth of work can do to open up doors to share the gospel.
Yep. I love it. I love that, Jordan, because that mindset matters.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I do every day is I try and have like I've written a bunch of daily affirmations of things that like God's kicked my butt with over the years, right? So one of them is I say I'm a earthly reflection of a heavenly reality.
Yes.
And so that's a like reminder for me, like how I go about my day matters.
Yes.
Because how I treat people in line at the coffee shop, how I interact with people, all those things matter because I'm an earthly reflection of heavenly reality. The other thing I like to say is that I do everything with excellence because it's in the difference that will point people to Jesus.
Yes.
And so those are the exact things as you're saying that, I'm like, oh my word, that's what those things are. So we want those to be handles that you would like. It's not just like, hey, check the box and do, I prayed for somebody today. Check, I moved them forward. But it's a mindset shift for a lot of us that we're not used to.
Yeah. We're
not used to. So expound on that idea of like, okay, as you're doing things with excellence, maybe you're like, hey, you have the person that comes up to you and they're like, what's different about you? What's going on? How would you encourage like these marketplace leaders to take that conversation? Where do you go with that? They're like, I'm not a pastor. I'm not like, I don't have like Romans Road memorized. How do you naturally encourage them to do that?
Yeah, so I'll give you a tool here in a second. That's my favorite tool for marketplace leaders to share the gospel with their coworkers. But first, Peter talks about this after he tells us to be prepared to give a give a reason for the hope that's within us. He tells us to share the gospel with gentleness and respect. And part of that respect, I think that's most obviously talking about gentleness and respect to who you're sharing the gospel with. But we also have to remember to show respect to our employers. Your employer pays you to do a job, and I'm willing to bet that sharing the gospel with your coworkers isn't part of it. So we got to be like really thoughtful about when we do this. It's probably not wise to do it when you're supposed to be in a meeting with your boss, right? And that might mean sacrificing.
Or getting your work done, yeah.
Yeah, that might mean sacrificing time to grab a drink with somebody after work to talk about it and get home a little bit later. But my favorite resource for people like me who sometimes feel inadequate at sharing the gospel with people is a terrific piece of video curriculum called Alpha. You can learn about it at alpha.org. I'm a super fan for Alpha. I do not get any affiliate commissions, but it's an 11-week video series.
It's very good.
That asks the big questions about life. Like I think the first video is about, is this all there is to life, right? The second one is about who is Jesus and what's the historical evidence for Jesus. But what I love about it is, number one, it's exceptionally well produced. I've never seen a piece of Christian media produced better than the Alpha series. Number two, it uses language that is friendly and gentle with non-believers. And number three, they bring in world-class mere Christians that give our faith credibility. For example, my buddy Scott Harrison that's running Charity Water. They've raised more money for clean water projects in the world. Non-believers can get on board with that. And Scott's there in these videos talking about that. Dr. Francis Collins, the most significant scientist, at least of the last 100 years, is in these videos talking about how he came to faith in Christ, even though he's a world-class scientist. So it's a great resource to do at lunch with your team members, to do after work with your coworkers, alpha.org. And I have nothing to do with it. I'm just a fan.
I love it. I love it. Well, Jordan, that's exactly like what we want this podcast and our conversations here in Momentum to be about, is providing resources. And so we hope that this is one of them. We hope that this is a conversation about it. Last question. I think we're running out of time, but like, I know you created recently a children's book. Talk a little bit about that and the mindset for the parents who are listening. And what's your aim with the children's book? Why write a children's book?
Because only so many adults will read 300-page nonfiction books. Like I honestly wrote this more for parents than I did for kids, and by God's grace, kids love it. It's called The Creator in You, and the core message of the book is that, contrary to every other children's book you have at home about Genesis 1, the sixth day was not the end of creation. Right? Every children's book is day one, God created this, day two, he created that, day 3, 4, 5, 6, the end. And it drives me bonkers because the sixth day, look at Genesis 1, 26 through 28, is when God passed the baton of creation to you and me. It's when he said, hey, listen, I created a lot in 6 days, but there's a lot that I didn't. Fill the earth and subdue it, right? Make it more beautiful and fill it with good things for my glory and the good of others. And so it gets at that in 3 minutes, and kids love it and adults love it. I think it's my best-selling book, which is crazy. It's a really fun little tool.
We bought it. We've read it to our kids.
I love it.
It's fun. Even awesome. Just having them like looking through the pictures and like it's very beautifully illustrated.
Oh, it's incredible.
So whoever
which
did
I
that
take zero credit for.
I was going to say whoever did that did a phenomenal job. So good job on that.
Thanks.
Thank you for being a part of this conversation.
My pleasure.
I cannot thank you enough for the partnership and the work that you're doing to help create these resources, because we really, really want your church to benefit. And for those of you who are pastors, to see the value in helping your students understand how God has created us, the gifts, abilities that he's given to us, and how we can leverage those things for God's kingdom in a powerful way.
Amen.
So Jordan, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you guys.
Yeah. Appreciate you all for tuning in to today's episode. If you have any questions, maybe you're asking some follow-up questions for this, we would love nothing more than continue to be a resource for you. And so you can email us at info@buildmomentum.org. You can DM us on social media and submit those questions to us so that we can talk about those on an upcoming episode. Thanks so much for tuning in.
Thank you for joining us for this episode. We hope you found it to be valuable. And if you did, would you share it with someone else in your network who might enjoy it? Also, would you please go on and subscribe, rate, and review it? That way you don't miss any more, and somebody else will be able to find it too. Also, because we want to be your trusted resource, if you have a question or topic that you would like us to discuss on an upcoming episode, send that to us via email to info@buildmomentum.org, or you can send us a DM on any of our social media platforms. You can find us there at Momentum Ministry Partners. Also, if you need more information on our ministry, be sure to check out our website at buildmomentum.org. Thank you so much, and we hope to see you next time.